In this video, I'm going to show you the secret to make your animation feel nice and smooth instead of stiff and ugly like this. And I'm also going to show you how to transition from this ball into a square. So let's get to it. We left off with our ball scaling and going side to side like this, but our animation still looks gross and ugly. And we're going to fix that by going into the graph editor. So click here, make sure you have one of your keyframes or your position or your scale selected, and click on this button to go into the graph editor. So you'll see this mysterious chart. Now, what does the graph editor do? If you press the plus and minus key on your keyboard, you can zoom in and out. And if you don't see anything, make sure you have one of your properties selected. So we're going to look at the position or the scale property first because it's simpler. It's only 2 keyframes. And we're going to see what's going on. If your view doesn't look like this, you might be looking at either the speed graph or the value graph. If you right click, you can see that we have edit value graph and edit speed graph. So I'm going to switch over to edit value graph, and you should see something like this. So what we have is a visual representation of our animation. And right here, it is very mechanical, straight line between 0 and 100%. And that's why the ball feels like it's very rigid. If you hold out your hand in front of your face, just move it in front of your face back and forth and notice how things move. It actually starts slow, goes fast, and then ends slow. And that is easing. Anything in the natural world doesn't move in that rigid, perfect same speed the entire time. It moves with this curve, like with a slow in and then slow out. And that's what we can recreate using the graph editor. So I'll show you how to do that. If you go in here and you drag to select both of these keyframes, you can right click, go down to keyframe assistant, and it goes off screen, but you'll see easy ease. And that all of a sudden smooths out our straight line. And if we hit play, you'll see that that animation is actually pretty smooth now. So I'm going to zoom out using the minus key on my keyboard and drag our work area in so we don't see the rest of the animation. We'll zoom back in and hit play so you can see that a few times. So now we see that we have a smooth animation. You can drag these handles and adjust how that curve works. So I actually want this to start fast. So it's going to go from 0 to 50 really fast. Sorry about my dog. And then I'm going to drag this keyframe. If you hold shift, it'll stay flat. I'm going to drag this handle out so that it has a nice smooth finish. So this animation should be something kind of like this. So it starts really fast and then it ends really slow. And if you hit play, you'll see that it does that. Congratulations, that's easing. That right there is the most important thing that you'll learn to do in After Effects. If you can master the graph editor, if you can master these animation curves, you can make your animation feel very pro, while a lot of other people who start in animation don't learn this until way too late. And it's the first thing that I look for when I'm reviewing someone's reel, whether or not to hire them for a project. All right, we're gonna click the graph editor button to get out of that view, and we're gonna continue to use those shortcuts, the minus to zoom out. And you can see now our keyframes have this little hourglass shape. That just means it is no longer a linear keyframe. A linear keyframe is that robotic mechanical motion, and these nice hourglass keyframes are smoothed keyframes. So as you can see, our scale is now smooth and our position is still ugly. So let's work on that. So we're going to select position. We'll click here to go back into our graph editor, and you're going to see another view that looks kind of confusing. So this is because we have our X motion on the red line is the left to right motion, and the green line is the up and down motion. Because we aren't moving up and down, it just stays flat, and the red line is moving from one side to the other. we're actually going to right click here and go to the speed graph because it is going to be easier to see what we're doing. And we're going to drag to select all of our keyframes. And then you can go down here and hit this little button, which will do the easy ease curve setting again. So if you click here, now you have smooth motion again. And this curve looks different than before. This one's a little harder to figure out, but I'm going to walk you through it. So real quick, if you click the graph editor button, you can see that now we have those smooth animation keyframes, and we have a result that looks better than it did before. So this is kind of the default easing. And again, this is where a lot of beginners stop. They learn, oh, linear keyframes, bad, easy ease, good. And that's a better place to be, but if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to have animation that competes on any sort of professional level, you need to learn the graph editor. You can't use the default settings. You got to get into the graph editor and learn to tweak things. So let's go back into the graph editor. And what do we want our motion to do? So I want this ball to kind of scale up, and then it moves to one side, and then it moves to the other side. So it's actually a drifting motion, goes really slow, and then it moves fast to the other side. And the reason I'm acting things out with my hands isn't because I'm trying to show off my insane dance moves. It's because animation is all about feeling and the timing and the spacing and the flow of motion. So it actually is very helpful to animate or to act out your motions with your hands or with your body, and then try to recreate that motion on the computer. Pro tip. All right, so let's start tweaking these position keyframes. So I'm gonna hit space so this stops playing. And I want this to start really slow, so I'm gonna drag this out. Now, what in the heck does this do? This graph is showing the speed of our object. So at the beginning, at this keyframe, it has no motion. So it's starting at 0, and then it's speeding up, and at 1 second, it's at the fastest it will go, and then it's going slow again, and then it's speeding up and then going slow again. So the more we pull these in and the more intense of a spike we have, the more intense the slow and then fast and then slow. So you can kind of picture that where it's right now, if we drag all of these yellow handles, we'll get these two mountain peaks here, and that will make our ball go slow, fast, slow, fast, slow. Let's hit play and see if that works. It does. Okay, that's looking a lot better, and it's really exciting for me to be sharing this with you because I wish I learned the graph editor so much earlier in my After Effects career, because it might intimidate you, but just by pulling those yellow handles out, just by adjusting those curves a little bit, we have this animation that went from super ugly and robotic to really smooth and polished looking in just a few clicks. So keep messing around with it. If it feels scary, don't worry. If you need to redo this section a few times, don't worry about that either. I really want you to nail this motion, nail the feeling of this before we go on, because this is going to affect the rest of your After Effects career. So the last thing we're going to do here is we are going to transform our circle from a circle to a square. So how are we going to do that? We're going to use the speed of motion to transition. This is actually one of my favorite transition techniques, and we're going to look for this fast point in the motion, and we're going to switch the shape while it's happening. You can trick someone's eyes by doing things like this, where you can actually take one shape and then while it's moving really fast, swap out a completely different shape, and it will feel right to your brain because it's happening during the motion. Techniques like this are used all the time in movies to hide edits during a whip pan. Also, if you've seen any of the transition videos on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, that's all just because you're cutting or you're swapping out an object during the fast part of motion. We still have the graph editor open over here, so I'm going to click here to go back into our animation, and we're going to click this little twirly dirly and go into the contents, the rectangle path, and the roundness. I told you this was going to come back. is right here. So we can keyframe any one of these properties. It doesn't just have to be the scale or rotation or whatever. We can set a keyframe here on roundness, and then we'll go ahead and scrub forward to here and set our roundness down to, I'm gonna set mine at like 8 because I actually want my square to have rounded corners. So if I click away, you can see that we have a nice square, and then if we scroll back, we have a nice circle. So I actually made this keyframe way too early. So I'm gonna go here to maybe here where it's in the middle of its journey, drag this keyframe over. So now as our animation gets fast, it becomes a square. So let's go over into the graph editor to see where the peak of that motion was. We'll click on the position and we can see the fastest point of the motion was about right here. So let's put our playhead there. We'll go back into the graph, click the graph editor button to close that. And let's make our keyframes kind of divided over that point. So now if we hit play, boom, we have a circle that becomes a square and you barely even notice it. I'm also going to select both of these, right click on those, go down to the very bottom, which unfortunately is off screen here, keyframe assistant, easy ease to make those keyframes smooth. Hit spacebar to play and you can see that we have a really smooth, polished animation. Just think back to the beginning of this video when you started with that really robotic motion and compare it to how it looks now. As I said before, that's the biggest difference between good animation and bad animation. It's the easing, and you do that easing in the graph editor. In this video, I showed you how to use the graph editor, how to get the curves using 2 different views of the graph editor, and then how to do a sneaky little transition by changing something during the peak of the speed of motion. In the next video, we're going to be using these same techniques to continue our animation and to reveal our logo. Let's get to it.